Hi, this is the video for Monday, September 28th for 12th grade English. Today we are working off of last week's unit with crimes. We're going to continue that and stay in the world of crimes and confessions. Today our topic will be false confessions, and this whole week otherwise we're going to be looking at one particular criminal case. It's still an open case, a murder case that happened in Baltimore, Maryland in the late 90s. So crimes and confessions continued, resisting assumptions and subjectivity, and trying to always look at the facts. And so today, false confessions is the topic. A little bit about last week, just to start things off. Projects are due today, and a lot of you chose things in the world of confessions. That's great. If not, there's lots of other interesting topics as well. Remember that that's due by 9, as our sentence stems from the week before. And everything goes in the big Google Doc. So your projects are going to be in the big Google Doc. You can list them under today's date or last Thursday's date. If you can't figure out how to link an audio file, then you can just email it to me. And then the sentence stems from last week. I'll be evaluating those as well today. We're going to start some new sentence stems this week. We're going to use before, after, and if statements. So you'll see that as I show you the stems at the end of this class, that I'm going to want you to start changing over your language to introductory dependent clauses. You don't need to know the name of that, but just knowing the sentences are going to look a little different. Right, so in the spirit of staying informed and staying objective, and to consider how that objectivity is always being tested, today we're going to look at that through the lens of false confessions. We're going to be pretty critical of detectives and investigators who are overly aggressive with suspects. So here's our stem for today, and you can open this up and put it in Monday, September 28th. This is week 4, so it'll go at the top of your document. Go ahead and take a moment to get out that document, get it set up for this week, and then add these stems to Monday. Before people confess to crimes they didn't commit, after people confess to crimes they didn't commit, and if people confess to crimes they didn't commit. Let you pause the video and go do that. You won't be able to fill in the sentences until after the lesson. Okay, so what we did in class, and you can do this on your own if you're doing this for async work, is address this question: what are false confessions? Why would somebody admit to something they didn't do? I'd like you to first read this interview with an expert. We actually listened to the interview, but it's quite long and you don't need to listen to all of it. You can stop at 10 minutes. That's enough to get you the basics of why would somebody confess to something they didn't do. Or I'll show you in the visual transcript. You can end it right here after Marty's story, where he stops his analysis here. If you're an observer in court and all you're hearing is that final statement, there's no way you can get past it. Stop. You can stop right there. And what he says, essentially, is that there are 3 types of false confessions. There's the type where people just volunteer that they did something they didn't do, and that's often because of attention-seeking behavior, or they're trying to protect somebody who did it. They do it without necessarily a sound mind, but they come to the police freely. And often those cases are not really taken seriously by the police. They have to just ask a couple of questions about the crime, and if the person can't answer them, the police see, okay, this person's just making this up. So those are not the more problematic false confessions. The more problematic that he focuses on are the second and the third type of false confession, where through the duress of an interrogation, an investigator or detective essentially coaxes a confession out of that suspect because they're in such an uncomfortable position for so long a time, under such stress and such pressure, that they start to think, I will say anything I can to just get out of this situation. And that is the second type of false confession, where they just admit to it so they can be done with the intensity of the interrogation. The third type of false confession he goes into is when the suspect actually internalizes that they did this thing, even if they didn't. They keep hearing the investigator or the detective giving them the details of the case. They keep hearing the detective accusing them. And after a while, they begin to doubt themselves and think that maybe I did it. and then they take on that identity as the person who did the crime. And those, he says, happen and are really problematic because the person has become convinced of their own guilt with something they did not do. So false confessions are rampant. 30% of the cases seen by the Innocence Project, which is a legal organization that tries to free people who are innocent of the crimes that they've been convicted of, 30% had a false confession at the core of the story. So they're happening enough that we need to be mindful that confessions might not be accurate or legitimate. And then for our public service announcement today, we wanted to just, I'm going to go back to the main screen here and say, make sure that we tell you all, if you're ever in a situation where there's been a crime and you are implicated, that you have the right to remain silent. That's the first thing that you might hear in the movies. If a policeman or a policewoman comes to you and says your Miranda rights, the first one you'll hear is you have the right to remain silent. And you indeed do have that right. You can always say, I'm not going to speak until my lawyer is present. They are allowed to say what they want to in the investigation to try to coax more information out of somebody. But a suspect, if that's ever you, has the right to refrain from speaking until a lawyer is present. So that's something we talked about today, just making sure you're aware of your rights. Then we looked at this very specific case of Michael Crowe. His story is here. We read this together. The sources I'm using are Oprah. She interviewed Michael Crowe, and it's a nice short article. It's not a long, it's a very long story. Michael Crowe, here depicted with his two sisters, was convicted of murdering his sister because he gave a false confession. We'd like you to read this story, and then if you feel like you can, watch his confession video, which is about 2 minutes long, and shows you exactly what the psychologist was talking about when somebody becomes so pressurized in the interrogation that they end up just saying whatever they think the investigator wants to hear, in this case, an admission to murder. So it's a really important video to illustrate these darker themes. And it's hard to watch, but if you think you can handle it, go ahead and check it out. We did it in class. All right, so at the end of all of that, I gave the new sentence stems. You can see them here. And your job after this lesson, after reading those couple of pieces and watching that video, is to finish the sentence stems before people confess to crimes they didn't commit. Then what? After people confess to crimes they didn't commit. And then what? And lastly, if people confess to crimes they didn't commit. And that is your work for today. Thanks.